Hello, friends. Today, we're diving into the mysterious and often terrifying world of caves. I've been getting a lot of requests to cover speleology, the study and exploration of caves, and I think it's time to start with one of the most infamous and chilling incidents that ever occurred in the Nutty Putty Cave back in 2009. But before we jump right in, I'd like to ask you to give this a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps, and now let's get started with our story. As usual, we'll begin from the beginning to set the scene properly. The Nutty Putty Cave is located in the state of Utah, USA, and it wasn't discovered until relatively recently, in 1960. This is a hydrothermal cave, meaning it's formed by hot water dissolving the rock over time, with an explored length of about 415 meters and a depth of 45 meters. The entrance to the cave is a simple hole in the ground, which locals have nicknamed the blowhole, drawing a comparison to the blowhole on the back of a whale. And honestly, there's a certain resemblance there, the way air might rush out or the eerie, breathing-like sound it can make in the wind. Typically, near the entrance, there's a rope tied off that leads down into a spacious chamber known as the Big Slide. From this hall, you can descend further into the cave and enter an area called the Maze, a network of smaller cave rooms connected by narrow corridors. Despite its ominous name, getting lost in there is nearly impossible, as long as you have a light source like a flashlight. In most of these rooms, you can stand upright without any issues, and it's relatively comfortable for exploration. Most casual tourists stick to the Big Slide. They snap a few photos, enjoy the thrill, and climb back out to the surface. But the cave has many more branches and passages beyond that. Tight holes in the ground where a person can only squeeze through by crawling on their belly. In some spots, explorers have to fully exhale all the air from their lungs just to fit through the constricted spaces and reach the hidden chambers that aren't accessible to the average visitor. These narrow passages have earned some truly sinister names, like the Birth Canal, the Aorta Passage, the Scout Eater, and others that sound straight out of a horror story. This is the domain of serious speleologists, not your everyday tourists who might wander in unprepared. The cave quickly gained popularity among local Boy Scouts and college students. Teenagers loved descending into this beautiful yet eerie underworld to test their nerves and bravery. Among the scouts, exploring Nutty Putty even became a sort of rite of passage, a challenge to prove your courage. Statistically, around 5,000 people visited the cave each year, making it a bustling spot. In fact, it got so crowded that in 2006, authorities temporarily closed it to manage the overwhelming flow of visitors. On the old website for the cave, there was a handy guide for tourists. Bring a headlamp with fresh batteries. A handheld flashlight won't do because you'll need both hands free for climbing. Also, pack a backup light source. You might spend anywhere from 1 to 4 hours exploring the cave. It's always warm inside, but very dirty, and in some areas you'll have to crawl on all fours. Knee pads will make you more comfortable. Take a water bottle and wear clothes you don't mind getting filthy. Solid advice for anyone venturing in. Before we delve into the main incident involving Jon Jones in 2009, I decided to do a bit of digging to see if there were any other notable events in this cave's history. And sure enough, I came across several intriguing newspaper clippings that paint a picture of just how dangerous this place could be. Let me share them with you. First, a report from August 1999. 2 teenagers from Salt Lake City returned home early Thursday morning without serious injuries after spending at least 12 hours stuck in a narrow passage in a Utah County cave. Chris Hale and Chris Morrow, both 17, entered Nutty Putty Cave, located west of Utah Lake, at 9 a.m. on Wednesday. By 10:30 a.m., they were trapped in a section known as the Birth Canal, about 120 feet underground, unable to move forward or backward. One rescuer described it like this: "These guys partially climbed in and got stuck. They were too big for the area they were trying to crawl through. It's narrow. It's an area where you have to suck in your gut to get by." The youths were with friends who called for rescuers. Hale was pulled from the cave at 10:30 p.m., and Morrow, who was stuck ahead of Hale, was freed a couple of hours later. Rescuers carefully pulled the boys by their ankles to extract them from the tight passage. They suffered only minor scrapes and were reunited with their parents. Another clipping from March 18, 2001. 2 13-year-old Boy Scouts from Sandy spent about 4 hours trapped in the Birth Canal section of Nutty Putty Cave. Utah County search and rescue personnel freed the tired and dehydrated boys. And one more from August 21, 2004. A 16-year-old teenager from Orem, who got stuck upside down in a cave during a hike with friends, was taken to the hospital on Saturday. About 20 volunteers helped free Brock Clark from Nutty Putty Cave, where he became wedged around 4 p.m. on Friday, shortly after entering the narrow cave. Brock was very tired and weak when he finally emerged from the cave around 6 a.m. on Saturday and couldn't walk on his own. The teen's mother said he got stuck in the tight cave with his left leg behind him, which disrupted circulation throughout the left side of his body. Brock would remain in the hospital until he regained his strength. The youth was climbing headfirst downward when he realized he had veered slightly off course. He tried to back out but only wedged himself in tighter. One of his friends stayed with him while the others went for help. It took rescuers nearly 10 hours to extract him from the perilous position. One rescuer said, "We pulled and pushed a millimeter at a time. It was very exhausting for him and for the rescuers." Rescuers noted that they pull people out of the popular cave several times a year. So, as you can see, the cave had already made a name for itself as a tricky and hazardous spot. You might be wondering, why do people keep crawling into these places? Well, the allure comes from spots like the birth canal, an extremely narrow passage, essentially a burrow, where you have to slither through like a worm. Why bother? Legend has it that by navigating this birth canal, you can access secret chambers in the cave that are off-limits to casual tourists. Naturally, this draws adventure seekers like a magnet. But to make it through, you need nerves of steel and the willingness to wriggle for a long time through an incredibly tight hole. And that's not all. From the birth canal, there are several offshoots that lead to dead ends. One such branch is called the Scout Eater, and for good reason. It's a hole in the ground that drops almost vertically downward. As a spelunker descends into it, they end up headfirst, thinking they're about to drop into a new expansive chamber. But the passage dead ends, leaving the person hanging upside down, squeezed on all sides by the cave walls. Escaping on your own from that position is practically impossible. Extracting someone is equally challenging because only one rescuer can fit nearby, and even then, they can only pull by the legs. It's a serious ordeal. As evidenced by those newspaper articles, thrill seekers had fallen into this trap multiple times before. But now, let's move on to our main story, the tragic tale of Jon Jones. 26-year-old Jon Jones from Utah was passionate about speleology. In his childhood, he often explored caves with his father and brothers, turning it into a family adventure. However, as he grew up, school years faded, and he set aside his caving hobby. He went to medical school, training to become a pediatric cardiologist, got married, became a father, and his wife was pregnant with their second child. Life was moving forward in a positive direction. But on November 24, 2009, Jon and his brother Josh decided to relive old times and headed to Nutty Putty Cave. It was a Wednesday evening, just a few days before Thanksgiving, and they entered the cave around 8 p.m. They weren't alone. 9 friends and acquaintances joined them, making it a large group by caving standards. They descended into the big slide chamber and spent about an hour exploring, having a great time in the underground wonderland. The cool, damp air, the echoing sounds, the thrill of the unknown. It was exhilarating. But Jon, Josh, and 2 of their friends felt that wasn't enough. They wanted more adventure. They decided to attempt the birth canal, that notoriously tight and challenging passage, believing it would lead them to a larger cavernous hall beyond. Jon took the lead, wriggling ahead for some time, but he didn't spot any grand hall. Instead, the tunnel narrowed further and plunged sharply downward. Undeterred, Jon pushed forward, perhaps spotting what looked like a widening ahead. But it was too late. He had made a critical mistake about 15 meters back, taking a wrong turn into the dead end known as the Scout Eater. This branch leads nowhere, at least not to any space big enough for an adult human. In any case, Jon kept forcing his way forward until he was completely stuck. To make matters worse, he had entered a crevice that dropped almost vertically downward, preventing him from backing out on his own. The narrow fissure where he found himself trapped measured about 25 by 45 centimeters, roughly the size of the opening in a washing machine drum, but irregular with sharp, jagged rock edges. Thus, Jon was trapped 30 meters underground, upside down with no way to free himself. His brother Josh, following behind, tried to pull him out by the legs but only managed to lift him slightly. As soon as he let go, Jon slid right back into the crevice. He was wedged in such a way that one arm was pinned beneath him and the other was pulled back awkwardly. Only his ankles and feet were free, protruding from the hole. He could move his legs, but gravity was working against him, pulling him deeper. Josh hurried back to the surface and quickly called for help, while one of their friends stayed with Jon to keep him company in the darkness. The first responder was Susie, a local volunteer rescuer, who dropped everything and rushed to the scene. She arrived around midnight, more than 4 hours after Jon had gotten stuck. Being small and agile, the girl easily squeezed through the passage and reached Jon.
Jon.
My name is Susie. How are you?
Susia.
Thanks for coming, Jon replied. But I really want to get out of here. Of course, the slender girl couldn't help much on her own. Pulling an adult man out from a lying position, especially when he's essentially hanging upside down, is a task beyond even the strongest athlete. Gathering a team to pull wasn't feasible either. Only one rescuer could fit near the victim, and even then in a prone position. Bringing in heavy tools like a jackhammer was nearly impossible due to the lack of space. Plus, using such equipment risked collapsing the cave and burying both the victim and the rescuers under rubble. How to extract him remained a mystery. Within a few hours, dozens of volunteers and professional rescuers gathered at the cave entrance. Even a rescue helicopter arrived, hovering overhead, but the puzzle of extraction persisted. They brainstormed everything, from lubricating the cave walls to more extreme measures, but ultimately settled on using a rope system with pulleys and blocks. One end was tied to Jon's legs, while a team pulled on the other. Meanwhile, they attempted to chip away at the rock with a small drill, but the tool was tiny, and the stone was incredibly hard. As I mentioned, hauling in larger equipment just wasn't possible. In an hour, they only managed to drill a few centimeters, realizing it was futile. Jon's position compounded the difficulty. He was trapped nearly upside down, with rescuers only able to see his legs. The ceiling above his feet was so low that they couldn't pull him straight out. His legs would just hit the roof. I need to pause the story here for a quick but important aside. Friends, I've started a new channel called Chaikin's Bestiary. There, I talk about mystical phenomena, creatures, and folklore. If you enjoy enigmatic stories from the past, you're welcome to join. You'll find the link in the description below the video. I'd be thrilled with your subscriptions, likes, comments, and shares. And now back to our tale. As I was saying, only one person could be near the victim at a time, and in a lying position at that. Positioning a drill at the right angle was nearly impossible. Pulling him by the legs was equally challenging. Here's what one rescuer recalled. When I arrived at the main passage near the entrance to the birth canal, people were working on the lifting system they had set up, until it was decided that the system didn't seem to be working. Along the way, I talked to teammates and asked, "How's Jon doing?" They said he was sinking fast, that he was fading in and out of consciousness, and had started talking about seeing angels and demons around him. At the end of the passage, right before where Jon was lying, there's a very narrow section, maybe 40 centimeters wide and 25 centimeters high, that turns sharply at 90 to 120 degrees, and you have to enter it feet first. You need to maneuver very carefully, and you can't see where your feet are placed. As I was crawling in, I felt something soft with my feet, which turned out to be Jon's legs. I felt them move, and I immediately lifted my feet, starting to slide horizontally into the crevice. Once squeezed into the narrower part of the crack, I began talking to Jon, asking how he was feeling. There was no response. I adjusted my position a bit and tapped his leg. I could hear him breathing deeply and gurglingly, as if fluid had gotten into his lungs. Then his legs shifted, as if he was trying to climb out of the crevice he was stuck in. His legs jerked wildly and convulsively, but after a second, he stopped. It seemed like he had lost consciousness again. I kept tapping his legs and thighs to see if I could get a response, but there was none. After that, I spent a few minutes studying the passage and Jon's position to figure out how we could get him out. It all looked very bad. I wondered if it was even possible to pull him beyond the point where he was stuck. We could continue using the rope, but it seemed we could only lift him another half-meter, and then his legs would hit the ceiling. Once he reached the ceiling, there'd be no way to tilt him into a horizontal position. He'd have to do that himself. But now he was unconscious, and even if we could get him horizontal, he'd have to navigate the toughest parts of the passage. If he were conscious and had strength, there might be a tiny chance. But even then, it looked extremely complicated. Even for me, weighing 55 kilograms, it was hard to squeeze into that gap. So extracting a 95 kilograms unconscious man seemed practically impossible. Another option I saw was using a jackhammer to widen the crevice he was in and remove some protruding rocks that were blocking the way. He'd get badly cut and probably break several bones in the process. But if nothing else worked, it seemed like the best bet. Through a tiny opening, rescuers managed to pass a radio to Jon. He was able to contact his wife, who tried to calm him down. By then, he was in bad shape. Breathing was difficult. His heart was working double time, trying to pump blood away from his brain. He started hallucinating and could barely distinguish reality anymore. He had been hanging upside down in that cave for 19 hours. It was decided to try pulling him out again using the rope and pulley system. Rescuers drilled holes in the cave wall, inserted bolts, and hung blocks with carabiners, through which they threaded the rope. Now 8 people could pull simultaneously. It seemed like there was a chance. Despite Jon screaming in pain, his body began to move. Finally, they lifted him high enough that one rescuer could look him in the eyes. He looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot, his face dirty. "How are you?" the rescuer asked. "This sucks. I'm upside down. I can't believe I'm upside down. My legs are numb." The rescuer noticed that despite his complaints, there was a smile on Jon's face. They rested for a moment, then decided to continue extracting Jon. He was almost out of his crevice, and salvation seemed imminent. But then, a loud crack echoed, and the team holding the rope was thrown backward. The rope slipped from their hands. The nearest rescuer felt something hard hit his face and blacked out. When he came to, he saw nothing but blood and dust on his face. As the dust settled a bit, he realized that the stone arch near Jon's feet, where the rope was anchored, had broken off, and the nearest block had flown off, striking him in the face. One rescuer suffered serious facial injuries and was hospitalized, and Jon slid back into his crevice, wedged even deeper than before. Here's what one rescuer wrote in the report. "By this time, it was around midnight, and we were asked to check Jon's vital signs. Took about 15 minutes to reach Jon. I went first to check in case the paramedic couldn't fit in the crevice. First, I tried the stethoscope and could only push it about 3 inches above and to the right of his navel. I didn't hear a clear heartbeat, just some raspy, fluttering sounds that were probably from my shaking as I tried to hold myself in an awkward position. Then I slipped my hand between the rocks and pressed on his torso as high as I could to feel for breathing. I don't think I felt anything, but again, it was hard to tell because I was shaking from the effort to hold on. His chest, pressed against the rock, felt warmer than the rest of his body. But in other places, his body temperature was close to the temperature of the stone on the cave walls. I removed his boot and tried to check the temperature. The thermometer showed nothing, which, according to the paramedic, was because the temperature was below the allowable range. I reported my findings to the paramedic above, then backed out so he could check himself. He managed to descend and confirmed that the man had passed away. 26-year-old Jon Edward Jones was pronounced dead. He left behind a child and a pregnant wife. But the horror of the story didn't end there. The question remained, how to recover the body? Jones and his family were devout Christians and wanted to bury him properly. Here's what one rescuer said about it. Given that Jon is already deceased, the efforts required to extract his body could lead to the death of volunteers and rescuers. His stiffened body won't make the bend through the narrow spot above his legs without significant alterations to the passage, which could take days or weeks with a jackhammer. Any swelling would make it nearly impossible to extract him from the crevice he's wedged in until the swelling subsides. There'd be no way to secure him to the rope except by his legs. And in a few days, we'd have to work in protective suits and masks for handling a dead body, which would severely overheat the rescuers. In pants and a short-sleeved shirt, a person usually starts sweating in the cave after about 10 to 15 minutes and can work for 30 to 60 minutes before needing a break. In a protective suit and mask, you'd probably only manage 5 to 10 minutes before needing to cool off. Not to mention the restriction on your mobility. The idea of extracting the body looks extremely complicated. A week later, state authorities decided to permanently close Nutty Putty Cave to the public. In the end, the landowner and Jones's family reached an agreement that the cave would be sealed forever, with the body entombed inside. Explosives were used to collapse the ceiling near Jones's body, and the entrance hole was filled with concrete. The cave became his grave. In 2016, a film called The Last Descent was made based on this story. This is perhaps one of the most horrifying tales I've ever shared. It strikes with its utter hopelessness. Crowds of rescuers, a rescue helicopter, the latest equipment, and yet people couldn't wrest a man from the cave's grip. It evokes a primal terror, especially when you recall the name of the passage, the Scout Eater. What do you think about this story? Share in the comments. I read them all. Don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. I know many watch without subscribing. Please subscribe. It's easy for you and it means a lot to me. You can also recommend this channel to your friends. I'm sure they'd find it interesting too. Bye for now. To make this narrative even more captivating, let's delve deeper into the psychological aspects. Imagine the sheer claustrophobia Jon must have felt. Trapped in utter darkness, the weight of the earth pressing in from all sides, his body inverted, blood rushing to his head, causing dizziness and hallucinations. The cave, once a place of adventure, transformed into a living nightmare, a maw that swallowed him whole. The rescuers, too, faced their own horrors. Crawling through tight spaces, the constant fear of cave-ins, the emotional toll of hearing Jon's pleas fade into silence. Stories like this remind us of nature's indifference. Caves don't care about human bravery or plans. They simply exist, ancient and unyielding. Expanding on the cave's geology, Nutty Putty is formed from limestone, dissolved over millennia by acidic groundwater, creating those intricate passages. The warmth inside comes from geothermal activity, making it feel like a sauna, but the mud and dust cling to everything, turning explorers into ghostly figures. The birth canal, in particular, is a test of physical and mental endurance. Squeezing through requires not just slim build but the ability to suppress panic as the walls close in, inches from your face. Previous incidents highlight a pattern. Young, eager explorers underestimating the risks. In the 1999 case, those teens' 12-hour ordeal must have been agonizing, cold, hunger, fear mounting as hours ticked by. The 2001 scouts, only 13, dehydrated and exhausted, serve as a warning to parents. And Brock Clark's 2004 upside-down trap echoes Jon's fate eerily. Though he survived, barely. Jon's background adds tragedy. A promising doctor, family man, cut short by a nostalgic trip. His last radio call to his wife heart-wrenching. "I love you," he might have said, voice weak, as reality slipped away. The failed rescue. The pulley system's collapse was a turning point. Hope shattered with that crack. Dust filling the air, blood from injuries, the scene chaotic. Post-mortem decisions weighed heavy. Risk more lives for a body? The family's grief, agreeing to entomb him, speaks to acceptance amid despair. The film's portrayal captures some essence, but nothing matches the raw accounts. This story lingers, a cautionary tale against hubris in nature's depths.